Sarah Ibifuro Akande stepped off the plane at Port Harcourt International Airport with her heart pounding like war drums. The familiar weight of the Nigerian humidity hit her like a memory she didn't ask for. She clutched her small carry-on and inhaled slowly. She had just completed her master's in psychology at Rivercourt University in the UK, and this was supposed to be her triumphant return, only it didn't feel like triumph. Port Harcourt hadn't changed much. Chaotic, booming, alive. But Sarah had changed. She had grown, healed, built herself up from the girl who had always felt like a quiet shadow in the Akande mansion. Her father, Chief Gabriel Akande, had promised to send a driver. None came. Of course. Deep down, she hadn't expected him to. So she hailed a cab, watching oil tankers and Danfo buses weave dangerously through the city's belly. Her chest tightened as they neared Omoku Heights estate, a pristine, exclusive zone that glimmered with quiet wealth. It had once been her home. It now felt like a memory that didn't belong to her. When the gates opened, the sight of the Akande mansion loomed before her, still stunning, still cold. She stepped into the foyer where nothing welcomed her, not even a hug from her stepmother, Clarissa Akande, who merely glanced at her with polite detachment. Her father was in his study. Their reunion lasted all of 60 seconds. A tired nod, no embrace. Then he returned to his files. Sarah blinked. She had crossed oceans to come back, and it was like she had never left. But she felt it. Something was off. Something was terribly wrong. Later that night, her ears caught whispers coming from the kitchen. Her stepmother's voice, sharp and shaken. "You're really going to do this? Sell her off to Collins Tamuno-Adelaja like some market goat?" Her father's response made her blood freeze. "I have no choice. He cleared the company's debt. He owns me. He owns her now." Sarah stumbled back, nearly knocking over a flower vase. Her breath caught in her chest. Collins Tamuno-Adelaja. The name made her stomach churn. The elusive oil magnate, ruthless, reclusive, powerful, feared. And somehow, now her husband-to-be? The following morning, Sarah could barely swallow her food. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. She had faced broken clients in therapy. She had counseled abuse survivors. But now she was the one with shaking hands and racing thoughts. Later, her father came to her room. "I need you to listen carefully," he said, sitting beside her. His face looked old, defeated. "2 years ago, I made a mistake. I borrowed from Collins Tamuno-Adelaja. He saved the company, but I couldn't pay it back. And now I'm the repayment," Sarah whispered. Tears burned in her eyes. "He gave me time, but the deadline passed. He wants a wife. He wants you. That's the price." The words shattered her spirit, her education, her dreams, her future, traded like currency. It was betrayal in its most bitter form. That night, Sarah called her best friend, Nimmy George, and for the first time in years, she sobbed uncontrollably. She wasn't a psychologist anymore. She was a daughter sold in exchange for shame. A week later, the morning air over Omoku Heights hung thick with tension. Sarah stood at the balcony of her room, staring into the perfectly trimmed garden below, as a convoy of black SUVs pulled through the estate gates. She had tried to imagine what Collins Tamuno-Adelaja would look like. Her mind had conjured up an aging tycoon, overweight, reeking of cigars and soaked in arrogance. But nothing had prepared her for the real man. He stepped out of the last SUV like he owned the ground itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, his skin a deep brown, smooth like riverstone. His dark eyes were unreadable, sharp, cold, and calculating. He was younger than she expected, maybe early 30s, but his presence, heavy, dominating. When he entered the house, time slowed. Sarah descended the staircase slowly, wearing a simple silk blouse and jeans, her quiet rebellion against this transaction. They met in the grand sitting room. Her father stood like a statue behind her, saying nothing. "This will be quick," Collins said. His voice, low, emotionless, and final, made her blood run cold. "The wedding is in 1 week. I don't care if you like it or not. It's happening. Sarah's hands balled into fists. You can't just buy me. I'm not property. You're not, he said smoothly, but you are mine now. His words sliced like a knife. Her father looked away. Clarissa crossed her arms and said nothing. She was utterly alone. "Bull, I won't love you," she snapped. Collins didn't flinch. He stepped closer. "I don't need your love, Sarah. I need your presence, that's all. Do as you're told, and we'll have no problems." She wanted to slap him, to scream, to break something, but all she could do was tremble as rage and humiliation surged inside her. The week passed in a blur. She didn't see him again, not until the day of the Iria ceremony, a traditional Kalabari rite of womanhood twisted now into a media-covered engagement rite. Guests came in lavish wrappers and abatas, musicians played, paparazzi circled like vultures. But Sarah, dressed in coral beads and ceremonial attire, felt like she was being paraded for slaughter. When Collins walked up to her in front of the gathered guests and took her hand, he said nothing. No smile, no reassurance. Just a whisper, "Do what you must, then go back to your room." He didn't even look her in the eye. That night, Sarah sat by the window, watching fireworks in the sky, her soul shattered. She had dreamed of love, of joy, of partnership. But what she had received was a man with no mercy and a father too ashamed to speak. The sun filtered through white linen curtains as Sarah Ibifuro Akande woke in a bed too large, too soft, and too unfamiliar. Her wedding gown lay crumpled in a corner, an expensive piece of art she had not chosen, had not celebrated in. The room, though luxurious, felt like a cage, silent, sterile, hers only by force. She sat up slowly, disoriented and hollow. The night before was a blur. The ceremony had been lavish, photos, toasts, the official signatures. But every smile had been painted, every vow spoken like a transaction. Collins Tamuno-Adelaja had barely touched her hand. His kiss, cold and distant, had landed on her cheek like a stamp of ownership. Now her name had changed, but nothing else had. The door creaked open. She looked up, startled. Collins entered, dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked at her like a stranger, distant, composed, unreadable. "You're awake," he said simply. She didn't respond. "The staff are at your service. You're free to use the house as you please, but you're not to leave the estate." She clenched the sheets. "So I'm a prisoner now?" "You're a wife," he said as if they were the same thing. She flinched. He paused, something flickering in his eyes. Was it regret? Pity? She couldn't tell. "I won't touch you," he added. "Not unless you ask me to." That, more than anything, shook her. Then he turned and left. The following days were strange. Sarah wandered the Tamuno-Adelaja mansion, a sprawling architectural masterpiece carved into a hill in Omoku Heights. It had pools, spiral staircases, art, luxury, but it had no soul. The kitchen became her sanctuary. She cooked her own meals, ignoring the confused stares of uniformed chefs. The library, with its vast mahogany shelves, became her escape. She sat on the Persian rug for hours, reading a psychology text she no longer believed in. The staff whispered when she passed. The housekeeper, Mama Ibuwari, looked at her with soft pity. The younger maid, Adazi, often avoided her eyes. She was the billionaire's wife, but everyone knew she was not loved. Unbeknownst to her, Collins was watching. Or he sat late in his home office, eyes fixed on silent security feeds. He watched her stir ogbono soup. He watched her read in the garden. He watched her sit still for hours. He told himself it was habit, just surveillance. But it wasn't. She was not like the others. She had made no demands. She had spent none of the money. She treated the mansion like a borrowed place. She had not spoken to him since that morning. And that unsettled him. One evening, Sarah sat by the glass balcony, staring into the distance. The Port Harcourt skyline flickered beyond the trees. She looked like a woman carved from silence. She didn't see the man at the other end of the corridor, watching. Collins clenched his fist, then turned away. Something in his chest was beginning to ache. Collins Tamuno-Adelaja had mastered the art of avoidance. He left the house before dawn and returned long after midnight, ensuring his wife would never see more than a flicker of his shadow. But still, something gnawed at him. Every night he reviewed the security footage like it was strategy, watching Sarah light candles before bed, bake banana bread for no one, or speak softly with Mama Ibawari in the garden. She never tried to leave, never caused drama. She simply existed. A quiet presence, both haunting and peaceful. It should have made him feel in control, but it didn't. It made him feel seen, and that terrified him. One night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat in the massive library curled under a blanket, watching the rain tap against the windows. Her head rested on a book she hadn't touched. Her thoughts spiraled. Why marry me if you'd rather be alone? What kind of man punishes a woman for her father's mistake? What does he gain by being a ghost in his own house? She didn't cry anymore. She had run out of tears weeks ago. That was the night she decided to confront him. She waited. At exactly 12:42 a.m., the mansion door clicked open. Collins entered, shoulders hunched, hair damp from the rain. He barely noticed her at first until, Collins, he paused mid-step. There she was in the hallway, barefoot, determined. Why did you marry me? His jaw clenched. You know why? No, she said, stepping closer. I know what you told my father, but I want to know why me? Why marriage? You could have taken the company, the house, the land, but you chose me. His silence thundered. You avoid me. You watch me. You control my movements, but don't speak to me. What do you want from me, Collins? What do you see when you look at me? For a moment, she thought he might walk away again. But this time, he didn't. I see peace, he said at last, voice rough. And I don't know what to do with peace. Sarah blinked. You scare me, Sarah, not because you're loud or angry, but because you're still here. You haven't broken down. You haven't begged. You haven't tried to manipulate me like others. You just are. Then talk to me. He looked at her like she had asked him to tear down a fortress built stone by stone. Talking opens doors I've locked for years, he whispered. And maybe it's time to unlock them, she whispered back. He didn't answer. But that night, he didn't disappear down the hall either. He sat across from her in the library. Silent at first, then slowly stories began to surface. His late mother, his cold, overbearing father. The first time he got sick, the second time he was told he had a 60% chance of survival. Sarah listened, not as a therapist, but as a woman whose heart was beginning to care. Later, as the rain softened outside, Sarah placed a steaming cup of tea in front of him. Their fingers brushed briefly. He didn't pull away. Collins hadn't been feeling well for weeks, but he ignored the signs, the fatigue, the sharp abdominal pangs, the dull ache in his lower back. He chalked it up to stress. He was used to pain. Pain had shaped him. He believed he could power through it like everything else. Until he collapsed. It was early morning when Sarah heard the loud crash upstairs. She bolted from the library barefoot, her heart pounding. The sound had come from his wing of the mansion. She found him in the bathroom, slumped on the marble floor, clutching his stomach, his face pale and drenched in sweat. Collins, she screamed, dropping to her knees. Can you hear me? He groaned, barely conscious. She didn't wait. She shouted for help, dialed Garden View Private Hospital, and with Desmond Oda's assistance, they rushed him into the emergency vehicle. The white lights of the hospital corridor felt like a dream. Sarah sat rigid in the waiting area, her fingers trembling. Her mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Colon cancer. That was the name whispered to her by one of the nurses. Her stomach turned. The doctors had caught it early, but this wasn't Collins's first battle. It had returned, and this time the treatment would be grueling. Hours passed before the doctor emerged. He'll need surgery and chemotherapy. We'll begin immediately. Sarah nodded. Her mind said run, but her heart refused. When Collins opened his eyes later that night, Sarah was sitting beside him. Her head rested on the edge of his bed, fast asleep. He stared at her for a long time. She stayed. From that moment, a shift occurred. Sarah became his anchor. She coordinated his medications, sat through chemo sessions hand in hand, cooked meals the nurses approved, watched movies with him when he couldn't sleep. She decorated his hospital room with small comforts, a framed photo of her mother, fresh flowers, warm socks, lemon-scented candles. Collins tried to push her away more than once. "You don't have to do this," he muttered one night, his voice hoarse. "But I want to," she replied, squeezing his hand. For the first time in his life, he cried, not from pain, but from the fear of being loved and not knowing how to receive it. Sarah saw every side of him now, the angry man, the tired man, the hurting boy who had built empires because he feared being powerless. And she stayed. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because she had begun to love him, quietly, fully, without needing anything in return. 6 months passed. Collins Tamuno-Adelaja had endured the worst of his treatment, and though the shadows under his eyes remained, the strength was returning to his body, slowly, steadily. But with that strength came an old companion. Fear. Not of cancer, not of death, but of dependence. He had survived because of Sarah. Her presence had held him together. Her arms had steadied him through pain. Her laughter, now faintly frequent, had become the sound he waited for each morning. But Collins didn't know how to need someone without trying to repay them. And so, he decided to let her go. She found the letter the morning after his discharge, folded on her pillow. Elegant, sterile. His handwriting had always been neat, but now it looked final. "Sarah, you stayed when you didn't have to. You gave me your time, your energy, and what I now realize was your heart. I never deserved it. This marriage was born out of debt, and I've paid the price in full. Not with money, but with illness, humility, and the unraveling of everything I once believed about love. So I'm setting you free. There's a check enclosed, more than enough to start over anywhere in the world. Please go live the life you put on hold for me. You are not mine to keep. Collins." Sarah stared at the note, her hands trembling. There it was, his fear dressed up as generosity. And she was furious. She stormed into the living room that evening, just as he walked in from a board meeting. "You're not serious," she snapped, waving the letter in front of him. "You think you can just write a goodbye like it's a business memo and vanish me from your life?" He stiffened. "Sarah, I'm only doing what's fair." "Fair? You think I stayed with you through chemotherapy for charity? You think I needed your check?" His lips parted, but she didn't let him speak. "You wrote me off like a mistake you're trying to fix. But you never asked me what I wanted." "What do you want?" he whispered, broken. She stepped closer, voice trembling. "I want you, Collins. I want the man who held my hand in the dark. The man who didn't speak for weeks but listened when I cried. The one who's afraid of love but still needs it. I want this, even if it's messy, even if it's imperfect." Collins blinked, tears quietly forming. "And you, do you want me?" she whispered. Silence more. His jaw clenched, his chest heaved. Then finally, he nodded. "I want you more than I know how to say." He reached for her, hesitant, trembling. She didn't flinch. Their embrace wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was raw, real, fragile. The kind that only comes when two souls have walked through fire and survived, together. That night, they sat in the garden under soft lantern lights. For the first time, Collins rested his head on her shoulder. For the first time, Sarah felt that her heart was safe. The sun over Omoku Heights looked softer that morning, not because the weather had changed, but because everything else had. Collins Tamuno-Adelaja woke slowly, not to the sterile silence of dread, but to the sound of laughter. Distant, bright, real. He followed it to the kitchen, barefoot in a plain white t-shirt. There, standing barefoot on a stool, flipping akara in a pan, was Sarah. Her wrapper was tied lazily around her waist. Hair in a loose bun, flour dusted on her arms. Mama Ibiwari sat at the corner, grinning like a proud mother hen. "You're smiling," Collins said, surprised at himself. Sarah turned, her eyes meeting his. Not the stare of a woman trapped, but of a woman who chose to stay. "I decided this place needed a soul," she said, "and Akara was the easiest place to start." He chuckled, a sound no one in the house had heard in years. The mansion changed after that. No, it didn't shrink. It was still large, intimidating, and filled with quiet corners. But now there were blankets on couches, books with folded pages, meals with burned edges, and occasionally music playing from the hallway speakers. Collins and Sarah found rhythm, not in grand gestures, but in shared routines. He worked in the mornings, she tended the garden. They met for tea at noon, and at night they walked barefoot through the tiled halls, sometimes talking, sometimes not. It was awkward, beautiful, real. One afternoon, Desmond Ode came visiting. He watched them sit together on the terrace, Collins reading while Sarah braided her hair beside him. "You're soft," Desmond teased, grinning. Collins didn't deny it. "It's strange," he said quietly later, after Desmond left, "how the strongest thing I ever did was let myself be cared for." Sarah smiled without looking up. "That's not strange. That's healing." And yet not everything was perfect. There were moments Collins would wake up drenched in sweat, flashes of hospital lights and hollow grief chasing him. There were days Sarah would stare at old scholarship letters, wondering what London might have been like. But every time they faltered, they reached for each other, not as saviors, but as witnesses to each other's scars. One night, Collins took her hand and placed something in it. A small carved coral bracelet, delicate red gold, passed down from his late mother. "She wore this on her wedding day," he said. "She would have liked you." Sarah's breath caught. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure." She didn't speak, just slid it onto her wrist and held his hand tighter. They didn't speak the word love often, but it dripped into their days in other ways. In the way Sarah corrected his diet, even when he scowled. In the way Collins kept a cup of Zobo chilled for her every evening. In the way their bedroom light now stayed on longer, not from avoidance, but from whispered conversations deep into the night. It was nearly a year since the day Sarah Ibifuro Akande became Mrs. Tamuno-Adelaja. What began as a forced union had transformed, quietly, beautifully, into something sacred. And yet Sarah still hadn't changed her name on her personal documents. It wasn't spite. It was protection of her identity, her past, her control. Until today, Collins stood in the corridor outside her study, watching her through the slightly open door. She was sorting through a pile of papers, passports, certificates, old notebooks from her university days. She didn't notice him until she spoke. "Do you know what name they're going to call at the psychology conference in Ghana next month?" He stepped in. "Which one?" She held up her badge. "Dr. Sarah Tamuno-Adelaja." His eyes widened slightly. "You're presenting?" She nodded. "On trauma and forgiveness, especially in marital structures that begin with imbalance." A beat passed. "Why the name now?" he asked gently. She turned to him, her eyes calm, voice steady. "Because I chose it this time." That night they sat under the garden lanterns, just as they had months ago, knees touching, fingers interlaced. Sarah reached into her robe and pulled out the letter Collins had written, the one where he had told her to leave. "I kept it," she whispered, "not as a scar, as a reminder that we both had the courage to change." He said nothing, just leaned over and kissed her forehead. "We should get married again," he murmured suddenly. Sarah blinked. "We're already married. Not like this, I mean properly. You in the dress you choose. Me without the shadow of a debt hanging between us. Our vows, our timing." Her lips parted in surprise. "Would you say yes?" She didn't hesitate. I already did, but this time I'll say it with joy. 3 months later, under the coral-colored skies of Bonny Island, where Sarah's grandmother once lived, they stood barefoot on the white sand. A small crowd of family, friends, and healing souls gathered around them. There were no cameras, no tabloids, no debt. Just two people, weathered by life, standing in love. As Collins placed the coral bracelet back on her wrist and whispered his vows, Sarah's eyes glistened. "I was once the price," she whispered back. "Now, I'm the choice."